Bukele was here in DC to visit Donald Trump to have the conversation, in particular, about the prison in El Salvador and the Maryland man who was sent to that prison, who was wrongfully sent to that prison, and the Supreme Court has ordered to send back. Now, I want to start off with this. This is important for people to see before we get into that part. Judge orders Trump to halt Alien Enemies Act deportations for Colorado detainees. Attorneys say their clients are at imminent risk of removal to notorious El Salvadorian prison. So here you see you have a judge that is ordering Donald Trump to halt this, to stop doing this. It goes on to say a federal judge in Denver on Monday ordered Donald Trump administration not to deport any detainees held in Colorado under the 1798 law it invoked last month to send hundreds of people to a brutal maximum security prison in El Salvador. U.S. District Judge Charlotte Sweeney's order temporarily prohibits the removal of all non-citizens in custody in the District of Colorado who were, are, or will be subject to Trump's March 14th order, which invokes the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Now, this is something I want to point out what's highlighted here. About 90% of the deportees have no criminal record, and only a handful had been charged with serious crimes. This report is coming from Bloomberg this week. Now, why is this important? Because number one, if you look at the numbers, there is no mass deportation that Donald Trump is doing right now. Right now, the numbers don't show that. There are controversial deportations that Donald Trump is doing, and this is one of them. 90% of the deportees have no criminal record. What is this really about? And one of the things that I warned you guys before is, as you see that this administration is coming after those who are immigrants, don't get it twisted and think that you are safe either, because they can also come after you under some of these same policies, especially now that they're cracking down on free speech. Despite what people will tell you, no, they are not supporting free speech. They are changing the definitions of words so that they can say you can't talk about it. This is a threat to everyone. And we'll get into this a little bit more to show you just why this is such a big deal. Now, this gentleman from Maryland was deported, wrongfully deported. You can see this here. The U.S. still won't say whether it'll return mistakenly deported man despite the SCOTUS decision. Okay, so here's a picture of him here. Bring Kilmar home, wrongfully held in Trump's overseas ICE jail. People need to understand that facility there in El Salvador is not like a regular prison. First of all, he shouldn't be there anyway, but it's not like a regular prison. We're talking about these people are tortured there. You're sent there for life. It's not like you're sent there and you're like, oh, you're only here for 5 years. Wrongfully sent. And so let's get into his story a little bit more here. The administration was doubling down on its decision not to tell a federal court whether it has any plans to repatriate a Maryland man who was mistakenly deported last month and remains confined in a notorious prison in El Salvador, despite a SCOTUS ruling and lower court order that the man should be returned to the United States. Now, this is the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. It's now weighing whether to grant a request from the man's legal team to compel the government to explain why it should not be held in contempt. What we are seeing now, you see, this is Donald Trump ignoring the Supreme Court. Where the Supreme Court said, you have to bring him back. He was wrongfully deported. And he's just like, whatever. Yeah, I'll do what I want. I don't care. This is a problem. Let's continue on. I want to get into a little bit more about his situation, the Supreme Court ruled last Thursday that Trump administration must bring him back. It goes on to say the judge here followed that with an order Friday requiring the administration to disclose Abrego Garcia's current physical location and custodial status, and what steps, if any, defendants have taken and will take, and when, to facilitate his return. Trump administration has asserted that Abrego, who lived in the U.S. for about 14 years before being deported, is a member of the MS-13 gang. Abrego Garcia has disputed that claim, and he has never been charged with any crime related to such activity. The Trump administration has called his deportation a mistake, but also has argued essentially that its conclusion about Abrego's affiliation makes him ineligible for protection from the courts. So this gentleman was accused of being a gang member, is not a gang member, and even the Supreme Court says he has to come back. And Black people take note. Everybody, but especially Black people, take note. Because I'm going to tell you something about this whole gang activity thing and how it could be incredibly dangerous. Because I remember this before only locally, and I'm going to get into that. So it goes on to say here that his location was first confirmed by the court by Michael Kozak, who identified himself in the Saturday filing as a senior bureau official in the State Department's Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs. Sunday's status update was signed by Evan Katz, who was identified in the filing as Assistant Director of Enforcement and Removal Operations for the U.S. Immigration and Customs, ICE, ICE, with the Department of Homeland Security. So this guy should not be there. Now, Bukele was here recently from El Salvador, and they brought up this exact situation with Donald Trump. And you need to hear this. Now, people say, well, Donald Trump's joking or whatever. Ha ha ha. Yeah, people thought he was joking about some other things, too, that actually happened, that came to light. This is why when people were praising, yeah, go get them out of this country, da 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 da, blah, 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 blah. They can do that to you. Let's get into this here.
Right now, President Trump is wrapping up a meeting with El Salvador President Nayib Bukele at the White House. The Central American leader has quickly become a close ally of President Trump's after taking in hundreds of alleged gang members from the U.S. and putting them in a notorious mega prison. One of the people detained at Seacoast Prison is Kilmar Obrega Garcia, a Maryland father who was mistakenly deported by the Trump administration. The Supreme Court recently ordered the government to, quote, facilitate Abrego Garcia's return, but stopped short of requiring the government to bring him back to the U.S. Here's El Salvador's president indicating he's not planning to send him back either.
How can I return him to the United States? Like, I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States.
That is a lie. Let me go ahead and debunk this right now. First of all, he wouldn't be smuggled in. The Supreme Court ordered him back. And even if he was here illegally or his status was not updated, there is a process that you have to go through. That process has been, it was skipped. And it's just, oh, this guy's a part of the gang. Let's throw him in there too. And I warned you guys that there were people that were being rounded up that were not even illegal. So he says there's nothing that he can do. That's a fucking lie. The U.S. government is paying this guy millions of dollars. You know that? They're paying him millions of dollars. The way that you get them released from the prison is him. He says, oh, we got to release this person. They're released. The Supreme Court already said, bring him back. He would be able to come back. When he gets here, yes, they will go through his status to see if, hey, was this were you here illegally, yada, yada, all that type of stuff. But there's a process that you have to go through. And this is what I was trying to warn people about. Do not sit here and believe these lies. And I don't care if you agree with how immigration is going in this country or not. The facts are the facts. And the fact is, he was not a gang member. The fact is, Bukele is lying to you when he's saying there's nothing he can do. He can release him, but he's paid to tell you that he can't. Millions of dollars they give to this guy. Let's go on.
Let's go now to CNN's Jeff Zeleny, who's at the White House. Jeff, they took questions for a little bit there. We learned a lot, including that big headline there that the El Salvadoran president does not intend on sending him back. But what more came out of the Oval Office today?
Well, Jessica, that meeting in the Oval Office showed that neither president, the U.S. president or the El Salvador president, showing any interest in trying to return the Maryland father who was wrongly deported. And, you know, as we've been following this for the last several weeks, the Trump administration admitted to an administrative error, and that led him to be wrongfully deported. Well, there was zero sign that either a leader or the U.S. government believes he should be returned. And now the Secretary of State and other White House officials are saying it's a matter of a foreign policy, and the Supreme Court cannot weigh in on this at all. But it was something else that the U.S. president said about the infamous prison in El Salvador. He said for the first time that homegrown criminals, that means American citizens, should also be sent there. Let's watch.
I'd like to go a step further. I mean, I said it to Pam. I don't know what the laws are. We always have to obey the laws, but we also have homegrown criminals that push people into subways, that hit elderly ladies on the back of the head with a baseball bat when they're not looking, that are absolute monsters. I'd like to include them in the group of people to get them out of the country.
Black people, listen up. Let me explain something to you. Everybody else can listen too, but especially to Black people. Let me tell you something about gang activity. When I lived in Columbia, South Carolina, me and my dad, I remember we were watching the local news and we started to notice something. All of a sudden, they started to attribute all these different crimes and say it was gang activity. It could be something small, right? Like there was a bunch of trash that was loitered outside Richland Public Library. People are contributing it to gang activity. Or it could just been people threw their trash on the damn ground, just stuff like that. But my dad and I started to notice the narrative. Everything all of a sudden was gang activity. And then the next thing you know, in Richmond County, particularly at the village of Sandhill, they started to implement a curfew. And anytime they saw the younger people hanging around Sandhills, there's a movie theater there. So a lot of people go to the movies and it's a big shopping area and restaurants and stuff. They're like, oh, it's after 9 o'clock. What are you doing here? Right? A curfew. Let me make something really clear. They can say anything is gang activity. If you were participating in the pro-Palestinian protests, they can say that's gang activity. If you participated in the BLM protest, they could say that's gang activity. Or if you just fucking protest, period, they could say that's gang activity. Don't you see how they're coming after the pro-Palestinian protesters and saying that they're all terrorists because they said free Palestine and they wanted a genocide to end? Don't you see how they're going after the universities, telling them what they can teach and what they can't teach? Don't you see how they're going after Black museums, telling them that you're not going to get any more federal funding because you have a section in there about slavery? Gang activity can be whatever the media says it is. Gang activity can be whatever the Trump administration says it is. It could be anything. Don't you remember when Joe Biden made that speech on the Senate floor and he said, I don't care if they're from a bad home. I don't care what environment that they're from. All I know is they're trying to knock out, punch my grandma in the face, rob my wife. Remember that? And he said, I want them off the streets. You know what came from that? Were the crime bills. And who did that impact the most? Black men. What I'm saying is this. there are ways that they can apply this to Americans as well. And people are saying, oh, that's not going to happen. Yeah, you guys said that about other things too. They don't like you. Maybe you talking about the wrong things or what they think is the wrong thing. They can say that too. For the people who are online who think they're not being monitored, I've been warning people about this. Be very careful about what you post on social media. You think they're not monitoring all the accounts that are criticizing the US government, that are criticizing Israel? They are. People who may identify as communists online, you don't think they're not monitoring those people? You don't know what's going to happen. So gang activity can be seen as different things. They can say, oh, there's 10 black people over on the corner. Looks like gang activity. Go take them down. And people think this is a no big deal. I warn people, they will come after the immigrants first, and then they will target Americans who they feel, as he put it, are homegrown criminals. They're calling protesters criminals, guys. And notice you don't see them going after any of the white collar ones. You don't see them going after wealthy criminals, the ones who have committed white collar crime. No, they're not going after those. Let's continue.
So pretty extraordinary words there. The U.S. president saying that he would like to use homegrown criminals as well. We are now seeing pictures right here of President Bukele departing. Let's listen.
Yeah, thank you.
So departing after his lunch with the president and members of his delegation have been meeting for a couple hours or so. But one of the biggest headlines, of course, is how central to the Trump administration's immigration plans the prison in El Salvador has become. And clearly, Trump has an ally in President Bukele. The smiles all around certainly made clear of that, Jessica.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Jeff Zeleny at the White House. Thank you so much for that reporting. Boris?
Let's dig into this case with former U.S. Attorney Harry Litman. Harry, thanks so much.
And pause here for a second. This is very scary what happened to this guy. This could happen to anyone. And you may think, and I know a number of people walking around now and they're like, well, I'm an American citizen, That don't mean anything. I was born in this country too. I'm an American citizen. They can mistake me for someone. They might look at me and say, oh, you look like you're from Haiti. You're coming with us. Can happen to anybody.
Thanks for being with us. First, I want to get your interpretation of the Supreme Court's decision, because the administration and the judge in this case are interpreting it in diametrically opposed ways. So what exactly did the Supreme Court decide? How does it line up with what we heard from President Trump and his officials today?
The Supreme Court decided that the administration is obligated to correct its own constitutional error to facilitate, I'll get back to that in a moment, Abrego Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador. I emphasize that, Boris, because they mangled it in their submission to suggest the Supreme Court just said, return him to the United States. That's wrong. Their job is, in fact, necessarily to go as far as they can into El Salvador to release him. Now, the facilitate, effectuate dynamic obviously is a recognition that if push comes to shove, if we needed to declare war to go into El Salvador, that there would be some limit based on Article 2 powers. You couldn't push the administration around, but not simple moves to repair their own constitutional violations. And this seems like today, as you've just described it, really a travesty, because Bukele makes it seem as if he has no power. That's preposterous, to use his own words. Clearly, this is done by a contract to them. All we have to do is, I think, lift our finger and say, return Abrego Garcia, please. And I think it's implausible that anything happened other than a choreographed discussion in the Oval Office where he could take that stance to aid his ally, Donald Trump, to try to stonewall the Supreme Court and ignore their own constitutional transgression.
Now, let me add something here as well, because I think some people are trying to figure this out. Like, if the Supreme Court said one thing, then how can they continue doing this? Well, first of all, I will say this. The SCOTUS took too long to get involved. SCOTUS should have acted sooner, right? When Trump announced that act and that he was implementing the act, they should have responded sooner rather than later. But what they've basically been able to do is to make sure that they get the people on the plane as fast as possible. Once the plane's in the air and they're there, that's it. So part of this isn't just the Trump administration. Part of this is on SCOTUS for waiting so long to respond and say, wait a minute, you can't do this or da-da-da, that type of thing. Like, a judge said, you have to bring him back. It's simple to bring him back. But Kool-Aid does have the authority to release him. He already got the approval from the Supreme Court. He does have it. He's paid not to have it. They're paying him millions of dollars to keep the people there. You think he's going to say, oh, I don't want this money now?
So here you don't buy the argument that administration officials are putting forward, like Stephen Miller, for example, when he says that a court cannot determine the foreign policy of the United States.
Look, it's all in the details, of course, Boris. What he's trying to reference is cases where you can't ultimately say, go to war, tell us where the troops are. This is, you have a contract and you must, there's no argument about the facilitate part. You must facilitate his release from custody in El Salvador to remedy your own constitutional violation. Obviously, that involves some communication with El Salvador, some request, which would be very easy, of course, in our contractual relationship. So to the extent he is saying that the mere mention of another country means you must be hands off, yes, that's wrong and contradicted by the Supreme Court's express holding last week and much other law.
What about his argument that Abrego Garcia was not mistakenly deported? He says, quote, when you have a withholding order, to be clear, that is not pause your deportation. What do you make of that explanation?
It is monstrous. That was what the order said is you made whatever you do with this guy, don't send him to El Salvador where he is going to be subject to gang violence. That's a lawful order. And the attempt by the president to just say, well, I say otherwise. You can't say otherwise. That's the whole point unless a court determines it and Abrego Garcia has a chance to contest it. And the only thing they've even pointed to is a stray remark by a confidential informant that really was discredited. So it's not simply false, but a real contradiction of the rights of due process before that determination, which could cost Abrego Garcia his life, is made. It is not to Donald Trump to now say ex post facto, he's a terrorist after all, don't worry about it.
Yeah, this is the warning that I think people need to understand. This guy was not an MS-13 gang member. And the Supreme Court already has stated this. And this could have been prevented if they would have followed due process. Like I said, I told you earlier in the segment, it has been reported that 90% of deportees had no criminal record. That's a lot. Literally all hell broke loose. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.